The air in Daenerys Targaryen's cabin aboard the ship sailing north was thick with unspoken desire and the weight of revelation. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, as she now knew him to be, stood before her, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. The truth of his parentage hung between them like a blade waiting to fall, transforming everything she thought she knew about her destiny, her claim, and her heart. "You are the heir to the Iron Throne," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the creaking of the ship. The words tasted like poison on her tongue, each syllable undermining everything she had believed about herself, about her birthright, about the dragons that had made her queen. Jon stepped closer, his face etched with pain and confusion. "I don't want it. I never have. You are my queen, Daenerys. You always will be." The sincerity in his voice only made the betrayal cut deeper. Here was the man she had fallen in love with, the man she had trusted with her heart, her dragons, her armies, and he was the one person in the world who could make everything she had sacrificed meaningless. The nephew who stood between her and the throne that was her birthright, her identity, her very soul. When he leaned in to kiss her, she let him. For one perfect, terrible moment, she allowed herself to feel what might have been. Love without politics, desire without consequence, a future where the Iron Throne was just a chair and not the symbol of everything she was meant to be. Their lips met in the space between heartbeats, soft and warm and achingly gentle. Jon's hand cupped her face with a tenderness that spoke of devotion beyond words. And for that single instant, Daenerys Targaryen was not the mother of dragons or the breaker of chains or the rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms. She was simply a woman in love with a man who loved her in return. Then reality crashed down upon her like a collapsing wall. The dagger slid between his ribs with barely a whisper of sound, its Valyrian steel blade parting flesh and muscle as easily as it had once parted the night when it nearly killed Bran Stark. Jon's eyes widened in shock, then pain, then a terrible understanding as he looked down at the weapon protruding from his chest. "You were always going to choose duty over love," Daenerys said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "And so was I." Jon's lips formed her name, but no sound emerged. Blood frothed at the corners of his mouth as he reached toward her with a trembling hand. She caught it in her own, intertwining their fingers one last time as the light faded from his gray eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered as Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, the man she loved more than life itself, died in her arms. "I'm so sorry." The sound of his body hitting the cabin floor echoed like thunder in the sudden silence. Outside, she could hear the crew going about their duties, oblivious to the fact that the course of history had just changed. Forever. Inside the cabin, Daenerys knelt beside the corpse of her lover and nephew, her hands stained with royal blood, her heart shattered beyond repair. But her claim to the Iron Throne was secure. The scream that erupted from Daenerys's cabin brought half the ship running. Jorah Mormont was the first through the door, his hand already on his sword hilt, expecting to find his queen under attack. Instead, he found her kneeling beside Jon Snow's body, her silver-gold hair disheveled, her violet eyes wild with grief and shock. "Your Grace!" Jorah rushed to her side, his experienced eyes taking in the scene, the dagger, the blood, the unmistakable finality of death. What happened? Who did this? Daenerys looked up at him with the expression of a woman whose world had just collapsed. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "There was an assassin. He came through the window. I tried to stop him, but—" She gestured helplessly at Jon's still form. The lie came so naturally that it frightened her. But the alternative, confessing that she had murdered the man she loved to protect her claim to a throne built on the bones of her ancestors, was unthinkable. Not because it would damn her in the eyes of others, but because speaking it aloud would make it real in a way that her shattered heart couldn't bear. Tyrion Lannister arrived moments later, his face pale with shock as he surveyed the carnage. "The king in the north is dead," he said quietly, the words carrying implications that reached far beyond the confines of the cabin. "He wasn't the king in the north," Daenerys replied, rising to her feet with regal composure despite the blood on her hands. "He was Jon Snow, my loyal advisor, and—" She paused, her voice catching slightly. "My beloved friend." Jorah's eyes searched her face, looking for signs of deception or hidden truth. He had served Daenerys long enough to know when she was keeping secrets, but grief could mask many things, and the pain in her expression seemed genuine enough. "We need to secure the ship," Tyrion said pragmatically. "If there was an assassin aboard, there might be others, and we need to decide how to handle this when we reach Winterfell." The mention of Winterfell sent a fresh wave of anguish through Daenerys. She would have to face Jon's family, the Starks who had welcomed her as an ally, who trusted her with their brother's life. She would have to look Sansa in the eye and lie about how the man she had come to care for as a sister had died. She would have to watch them grieve for a man whose death was her doing. "Tell the crew that Jon died defending me from an assassin," she commanded, her voice growing stronger as she slipped back into the role of queen. "Tell them that he died a hero, saving the woman he loved." At least that part wasn't entirely a lie. The banners of House Targaryen and House Stark that should have flown together in triumph instead flew at half-mast as the fleet approached White Harbor. Word of Jon Snow's death had spread quickly through the ship, and by the time they made landfall, the entire expedition was draped in mourning. Sansa Stark met them at the harbor, her face a mask of controlled grief that reminded Daenerys painfully of Ned Stark's legendary composure. Behind her stood Arya, whose dark eyes seemed to pierce straight through Daenerys's carefully constructed facade, and Bran, whose strange, distant gaze made her skin crawl with the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen. "Your Grace," Sansa said formally, offering a curtsy that was respectful but not subservient. "We received word of our brother's death. Please accept our family's condolences for your loss as well as our own." The carefully chosen words struck Daenerys like physical blows. Your loss as well as our own. Did Sansa suspect? Did she know that Jon's death was more than just the random violence of an assassin? "Lady Sansa," Daenerys replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "Jon died protecting me. He gave his life so that I might live to continue our mission in the north. His sacrifice will not be forgotten." Arya stepped forward, her hand resting casually on the pommel of needle. "How exactly did he die, Your Grace? The reports we received were unclear." The question hung in the air like a drawn blade. Daenerys met Arya's gaze directly, calling upon every lesson in statecraft and deception that her years of ruling had taught her. "An assassin infiltrated my cabin during the night. Jon fought bravely to defend me, but the attacker was skilled and desperate. When it was over, Jon lay dying in my arms, and the assassin had fled into the darkness." The lie flowed like honey from her lips, sweet and believable and completely false. "Did you catch this assassin?" Arya pressed, her tone deceptively casual. "Casual. He escaped in the confusion," Daenerys replied. "But I swear to you, on the memory of my dragons and the honor of my house, that Jon's death will be avenged." Bran spoke for the first time, his voice carrying that otherworldly quality that had marked him since his fall. "Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones we trust the most." The words sent a chill down Daenerys' spine, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. "Indeed. Which is why we must be even more vigilant as we face the threat beyond the wall." The procession to Winterfell was a somber affair. Jon's body, carefully prepared and draped in Stark colors, was carried on a litter surrounded by honor guards from both armies. Daenerys rode beside it, playing the part of the grieving beloved to perfection, while her heart slowly turned to ice with each passing mile. The great hall of Winterfell had been prepared for Jon's lying in state, and, as his body was placed before the high table, Daenerys found herself remembering the first time she had seen this ancient seat of northern power. Then she had been a conqueror seeking allies. Now she was a murderer seeking forgiveness from the family of her victim. Jon Snow's funeral was held in the Godswood of Winterfell, beneath the ancient weirwood that had watched over the Stark family for thousands of years. The ceremony blended northern traditions with the customs Jon had learned during his time beyond the Wall, creating something entirely unique for a man who had always existed between worlds. Sansa spoke first, her voice carrying clearly through the assembled crowd of northern lords, Targaryen loyalists, and foreign dignitaries. Jon Snow was my father's son in all the ways that mattered. He was brave, honorable, and devoted to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He died as he lived, putting others before himself. Arya's eulogy was shorter, but no less heartfelt. My brother taught me that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. He was the best of all of us, and the North will be colder without him. When it came time for Daenerys to speak, she rose with the weight of her deception pressing down upon her shoulders like a cloak of lead. The words she had prepared were true in their emotion, even if they were false in their details. Jon Snow showed me what it meant to rule with honor, she began, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. He taught me that a crown is not a prize to be won, but a burden to be carried in service of others. He died defending me not because I was his queen, but because he believed in the cause we shared, protecting the realm from the darkness that threatens to consume it. She paused, her eyes finding each member of the Stark family in turn. I promise you this. His death will have meaning. The fight he died for will continue, and the realm he loved will be protected. This I swear by fire and blood. The traditional Stark burial followed, with Jon's body being placed in the crypts beneath Winterfell alongside his ancestors. As the stone doors sealed shut, Daenerys felt as though she was burying more than just the man she loved. She was burying the last part of herself that was capable of choosing love over power. The immediate effect of Jon's death was to solidify Daenerys's claim to the Iron Throne in ways she had never anticipated. With the last male-line Targaryen heir gone, there was no longer any question about the succession. She was the undisputed ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, her legitimacy unchallenged by competing claims. But the political landscape had shifted in other ways as well. The northern lords, already suspicious of southern rulers, became even more insular and protective after losing their beloved bastard prince. Sansa's position as Lady of Winterfell was strengthened, and she began to assert northern independence, more aggressively than ever before. The North remembers, she told Daenerys during a private meeting in the Solar where Ned Stark had once ruled. We remember those who help us, and we remember those who fail us. Jon believed in you, Your Grace. That belief cost him his life. The question now is whether his faith was justified. The words were carefully chosen, offering both support and threat in equal measure. Daenerys understood the subtext perfectly. The North would fight for her against the dead, but their loyalty beyond that was conditional on her proving worthy of Jon's sacrifice. Tyrion, meanwhile, found himself in an increasingly difficult position. As Hand of the Queen, he needed to manage the political fallout from Jon's death while preparing for the coming war against the Night King. The loss of Jon's military leadership was devastating. He had been the one person who truly understood the threat beyond the Wall and had the respect of both armies. We need to choose a new commander for the northern forces, Tyrion told Daenerys during one of their strategy sessions. Someone the northern lords will follow into battle against the dead. Jorah will command, Daenerys replied without hesitation. Your Grace, with respect, Sir Jorah is a southerner and a former slaver. The northern lords barely tolerate him as it is. We need someone with northern blood, someone they trust. Daenerys's eyes flashed with anger. And who would you suggest? Sansa. She's never commanded anything larger than a household guard. Arya. She's an assassin, not a general. There's always, Tyrion began, then stopped himself before suggesting that they recall one of the other northern lords who might have the necessary experience. Say it, Daenerys commanded. There's always the possibility of legitimizing one of Jon's bastards, Tyrion said carefully. If he left any children behind, they could serve as a rallying point for northern loyalty. The suggestion hit Daenerys like a physical blow. The idea that Jon might have fathered children, that part of him might still exist in the world, was both a comfort and a torment. But more than that, it represented a potential threat to her newly secured claim. Jon had no bastards, she said firmly. He told me so himself. It was another lie, but one that was easier to maintain than the truth. Jon had indeed fathered no children, but not because he had confided in her, because she had made sure to ask the right questions of the right people to be certain that no loose ends remained to complicate her rule. The Battle of Winterfell proceeded much as it might have with Jon alive, but with crucial differences that rippled through every aspect of the conflict. Without Jon's tactical expertise and his ability to coordinate between the various factions, the defense was more chaotic and less effective. Daenerys found herself thrust into a military leadership role she was unprepared for. Her experience in Essos had involved conquering cities and fighting human enemies, not coordinating a desperate last stand against an army of the dead. The dragons were devastating against the Whites, but even they could not be everywhere at once. The loss of Jon's stabilizing presence was felt most acutely in the relationships between the various commanders. Jorah and Jaime Lannister clashed over strategy, while the northern lords questioned every decision that came from southern advisors. The unity that Jon had helped build through his personal relationships was fracturing under the pressure of impending doom. When the Night King finally fell, brought down by Arya Stark in a moment of perfect stealth and courage, the victory felt hollow to Daenerys. They had won, but at a terrible cost. Thousands lay dead, Winterfell was in ruins, and the woman who should have been celebrating the greatest triumph of her life felt only emptiness. The victory feast was a subdued affair, with too many empty chairs and too many fresh graves. When the northern lords raised their cups to toast Jon Snow's memory, calling him the hero who had made their victory possible, Daenerys joined the toast with wine that tasted like ashes in her mouth. "To Jon Snow," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "who gave everything for the realm." The irony of her words was lost on everyone but herself. With the threat of the dead eliminated, attention turned to the remaining challenge: Cersei Lannister's hold on King's Landing and the Iron Throne. The army that marched south was smaller than it might have been. Many northern lords chose to remain in Winterfell to rebuild rather than continue the war, but it was still formidable. The political dynamics had shifted significantly since Jon's death. Sansa had declared that the North would not march beyond the Neck, effectively seceding from the Seven Kingdoms while maintaining the fiction of independence rather than open rebellion. It was a brilliant political maneuver that left Daenerys with little choice but to accept it, or risk a war on two fronts. "You're letting them go," Tyrion observed as they watched the northern banners turning back toward Winterfell. "I'm choosing my battles," Daenerys replied. "The North has earned its independence through blood and sacrifice. Better to rule 6 kingdoms willingly than 7 reluctantly." The truth was more complex. Without Jon's unifying presence, Daenerys knew she could never truly win the loyalty of the North. His death had created a martyr that would inspire northern resistance for generations. Better to grant them what they wanted now and hope that time would heal the wounds between them. The siege of King's Landing proceeded more smoothly than expected. Cersei's position had been weakened by the revelation that the dead had been real, and that she had chosen to let the realm fight them without aid. Many of the Lannister loyalists who might have fought to the death for their queen instead chose surrender when faced with the might of dragons and the righteousness of Daenerys' cause. When Cersei finally fell, not to fire and blood, but to a crossbow bolt fired by her own brother Tyrion in a moment of desperate fury, Daenerys found herself standing in the throne room of the Red Keep, staring up at the iron throne that had cost her everything to claim. The twisted metal seat looked smaller than she had imagined, less impressive than the stories had made it seem. This was what she had killed for? This uncomfortable chair made from the swords of conquered enemies? "Your Grace," Tyrion said softly, "the throne awaits." Daenerys climbed the steps slowly, each one feeling like a mile. When she finally settled onto the Iron Throne, the metal bit into her back through her dress, drawing blood as it had from so many rulers before her. The symbolism was not lost on her. The throne demanded blood, and she had certainly provided it. Daenerys' early reign was marked by a series of reforms that surprised both supporters and critics. Having achieved power through deception and murder, she seemed determined to rule with a justice that Jon Snow would have approved of. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was genuine conviction, or perhaps it was simply the understanding that she needed to be better than her worst moment if she wanted to be remembered as anything other than a kinslayer. Her first act was to formally pardon all those who had fought against her during the war, including many Lannister loyalists who had expected death or exile. Her second was to establish a new legal code that emphasized rehabilitation over punishment, drawing inspiration from the restorative justice practices she had observed during her time in Essos. The third act was the most controversial. She established what became known as the Royal Commission on Truth and Reconciliation, tasked with investigating the crimes committed during the various wars that had torn the realm apart. The commission was given broad powers to compel testimony and examine evidence, with the goal of creating a comprehensive record of what had happened and why. Tyrion, serving as Hand of the Queen, supported these initiatives while privately worrying about their long-term implications. "Your Grace," he said during one of their private meetings, "the commission's work could uncover truths that might be uncomfortable for the crown." "Let them investigate," Daenerys replied firmly. "If we're going to build a better realm, we need to understand how the old one failed." What she didn't say was that the commission served another purpose. It provided her with a way to monitor and control the narrative around Jon's death. By positioning herself as a champion of truth and transparency, she made it more difficult for others to question her version of events. The commission's work continued for 3 years, ultimately producing a comprehensive report that detailed the crimes and failures of multiple rulers and institutions. Surprisingly, their investigation into Jon Snow's death concluded that he had indeed died defending the Queen from an unknown assassin, citing the physical evidence and witness testimony that Daenerys had carefully managed. Despite her public success, Daenerys' private life was marked by an emptiness that no amount of power could fill. She never married, despite pressure from advisors who wanted to secure the succession. She claimed that no man could match the memory of Jon Snow, and in a sense, that was true. No one could compete with the idealized version of the man she had created in her mind to replace the complicated reality of what their relationship had been. She often found herself talking to Jon's memory, carrying on conversations with a ghost who existed only in her guilty conscience. Sometimes she asked for his advice on difficult decisions. Sometimes she begged for his forgiveness. Sometimes she simply told him about her day, as if he were still there to listen. The dragons sensed her anguish and grew increasingly protective of their mother. Drogon, in particular, became almost aggressive toward anyone who approached Daenerys too closely, as if he understood that she had been wounded in ways that claws and fire could not heal. "You're not sleeping," Tyrion observed one morning, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands shook slightly as she reached for her wine cup. "The crown is heavy," she replied, using the same words that kings and queens had used for centuries to explain the burden of rule. Jon wouldn't want you to suffer like this, Tyrion said gently. The comment hit her like a physical blow. Don't, she warned, her voice sharp with pain. Don't tell me what Jon would want. You didn't know him like I did. But that was the cruelest irony of all. She hadn't known Jon either, not really. She had loved an idealized version of him, a fantasy built on desire and political convenience. The real Jon Snow, with all his complexities and contradictions, had died with his secrets intact. As the years passed and Daenerys remained unmarried and childless, the question of succession became increasingly urgent. The small council met regularly to discuss potential candidates, but Daenerys remained resistant to all suggestions. The realm needs stability, Your Grace, Grand Maester Samwell Tarly argued during one such meeting. If something were to happen, to you without a clear heir, we could face another civil war. Then perhaps it's time to consider alternatives to hereditary monarchy, Daenerys replied, a suggestion that sent shockwaves through the council. The idea she proposed was revolutionary. Instead of passing the crown to a blood relative, she would establish a new system where the monarch's successor would be chosen by a council of representatives from all 7 kingdoms. It was a form of elective monarchy that drew inspiration from the traditions of the Iron Islands and the free cities of Essos. You're talking about ending a tradition that goes back 3 centuries, Tyrion warned. I'm talking about creating something better, Daenerys countered. A system where power is earned rather than inherited, where the crown goes to the most capable rather than the most legitimate. The proposal sparked fierce debates throughout the realm. Some saw it as a visionary reform that would prevent future wars of succession. Others viewed it as a dangerous break with tradition that would lead to chaos and instability. In the end, Daenerys managed to build enough support for a modified version of her proposal. The Great Charter, as it came to be known, established that future monarchs would be chosen by a great council comprising representatives from each of the 7 kingdoms, but only from among the blood relatives of House Targaryen. It was a compromise that satisfied neither the traditionalists nor the reformers completely, but it provided a path forward. 10 years after Jon's death, Daenerys finally returned to Winterfell. The visit was officially a state journey to the independent Kingdom of the North, but everyone understood its deeper significance. This was where Jon had lived, where he had died, and where his memory was most strongly preserved. Sansa Stark, now Queen in the North, received her with careful courtesy. The years had been kind to neither woman. Sansa's red hair was streaked with premature silver, while Daenerys looked older than her years, worn down by the weight of ruling and the burden of her secrets. "Your Grace," Sansa said formally, offering, a curtsy that was respectful but not subservient. "Winterfell welcomes you." "Your Majesty," Daenerys replied, acknowledging Sansa's royal status in her own right. "Thank you for receiving me." The conversation that followed was polite but strained, both women dancing around the ghost that stood between them. It wasn't until they visited Jon's tomb in the crypts that the carefully maintained facades finally cracked. "Do you ever wonder if we failed him?" Sansa asked as they stood before the stone effigy that bore Jon's likeness. The question cut through Daenerys like a blade. "Every day," she replied honestly. "He believed in you," Sansa continued. "Even when the rest of us had doubts, he never wavered in his faith that you would be a good queen." "He was wrong," Daenerys said quietly. Sansa studied her face carefully. "Was he? The realm is at peace. The wars have ended. The people prosper under your rule. Perhaps he wasn't wrong about you. Perhaps you simply weren't ready to see what he saw." The absolution in Sansa's words was more painful than any accusation could have been. Here was Jon's sister, offering forgiveness for failures that she didn't even know about, finding virtue in a woman who had murdered the man they both loved. Daenerys ruled for 23 years, until a fever finally claimed her during a harsh winter that reminded everyone why the Starks' words were, "Winter is coming." She died in her bed in the Red Keep, surrounded by advisors and servants, but fundamentally alone in the way that only those who carry terrible secrets can be. Her last words, according to those present, were an apology directed at someone who wasn't in the room. "I'm sorry, John," she whispered as her strength finally failed. "I'm so sorry." The Great Council convened as planned, and after much deliberation, they chose her distant cousin Aegon Blackfyre to succeed her. The transition of power was smooth and peaceful, validating her belief that elective monarchy could work in Westeros. At her funeral, representatives from all 7 kingdoms came to pay their respects to the queen, who had ended the age of constant warfare. Sansa Stark herself delivered one of the eulogies, speaking of a complex woman who had carried heavy burdens and made difficult choices in service of the realm. "History will judge Queen Daenerys by her actions, not her intentions," Sansa said. "But those of us who knew her understand that her greatest victory was not the conquest of her enemies, but the conquest of herself. She became the ruler the realm needed, even when that meant sacrificing what she wanted most." The irony of those words was lost on everyone present except perhaps Bran Stark, whose strange sight might have seen the truth that others missed. Daenerys had indeed conquered herself, but only after destroying the person she might have been. In the histories written after her death, Queen Daenerys was remembered as the peacemaker, the monarch who ended the cycle of civil wars that had plagued Westeros for generations. Her reforms, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Great Charter, the establishment of elective monarchy, were seen as visionary achievements that transformed the nature of rule itself. The manner of Jon Snow's death became a footnote in the larger story of her reign, remembered mainly as the tragic loss that inspired her dedication to justice and peace. The official histories recorded that he died defending his queen from an assassin, a hero's death that befitted his noble character. No one questioned this narrative because no one had reason to doubt it. The physical evidence supported it. The witnesses confirmed it, and the alternative, that the beloved queen had murdered the man she loved, was simply too horrible to contemplate. But in the crypts beneath Winterfell, where Jon Snow lay among his ancestors, the truth waited in the darkness. Carved into the stone of his tomb, invisible to casual observers but clear to those who knew how to look, were scratches that spelled out a single word in the ancient runes of the first men: forgiven. Whether those marks had been carved by Bran, Stark's hand, or by some other agency, no one could say. But their message was clear. Even the dead could offer absolution to those who sought it, and perhaps, in the end, that was enough. In the years following Daenerys' death, as the realm continued to prosper under the new system she had established, scholars and poets began to construct a different version of her story. In their telling, she became a tragic figure who sacrificed personal happiness for duty, who chose the good of the realm over her own desires, who carried burdens that would have crushed lesser rulers. They were not entirely wrong. Daenerys had indeed sacrificed everything for power: her conscience, her capacity for love, her very soul. The question that haunted her legacy was whether that sacrifice had been worth making. The realm was at peace. The people prospered. The wars had ended. By any measure of success that mattered to history, her reign had been a triumph. But the woman who had achieved that triumph had paid a price that no crown could justify, and no throne could redeem. In the end, Daenerys Targaryen got everything she had ever wanted, and discovered that it was not enough to fill the void where her heart had been. The Iron Throne had demanded blood, and she had given it Jon Snow's. But thrones, like dragons, were never satisfied with a single meal. They always hungered for more. The last Targaryen queen had learned too late that some victories were indistinguishable from defeat, and that the heaviest crown was the one worn by those who had sacrificed their souls to claim it. Her legacy would endure long after her death, but it would always be built on the bones of the man she had loved and killed. The secret that had died with her and the forgiveness that came too late to save her from herself.